Hey guys, so we're going to continue teaching you a little bit about fractions, and we're going to move past multiplication and focus on division. Now, dividing fractions can be a little trickier when you're looking at a visual model. So once again, I'm going to show you numerically what we do or using numbers, and then I'm going to also provide somewhat of a model to help you kind of process some of this information and help you better understand. So you ready? I hope you are. So the first thing that we're going to start off with is dividing a whole number by a fraction. So we're going to start off with 3 divided by a half. Now I can easily picture in my mind 3 squares. You can use circles, rectangles, as long as you're creating them equally. And they want me to divide these in half or by half. Okay, so when you divide it by half, it's almost like you're taking scissors and you're cutting it by 2 sections. Okay, so then I want to see how many half groups I have in 3. So I've got 1. There's another one. There's another one. Another half. Another half. And another half. So altogether, I actually have 6 halves. What does this look like numerically? Well, there is a saying out there that you might hear about where we say same, change, flip. Flip is what we call the inverse reciprocal. Now, the inverse reciprocal is something that you will learn in middle school, not necessarily having to be required in 5th grade. But I will tell you, it's a nice strategy to have when you're trying to remember how to solve a division problem, and you can't quite remember the model that goes with it. So here it is again. We're going to keep the 3 the same. That total never changes. We always start off with the same total. The inverse of division is multiplication. And instead of using the fraction 1/2, we flip it. If you change the division symbol to multiplication, that's the inverse. You also have to change the fraction, okay? So reciprocal just means the opposite. So it'll be 2/1. So let me slow down a little bit more. Remember before in our multiplication videos that 3 is the same as 3/1. So it stays the same. We changed it to multiplication and we flipped or found the reciprocal of the fraction 1/2. Same, change, flip. And then from here we just multiply straight across and it becomes 6/1 or 6. Okay? Okay, this time we're going to divide a fraction by a whole number. So we're going to take a look at 4/5, and we want to see how many we can create with 4/5. So here's what I'm going to do right now. I noticed that my denominator is a 5. So I'm going to actually create a 4/5 grid or visual model right below. Okay, nice and large. And I'm also going to use the area 4/5 because I'm working with groups of 4. So I have my 5ths, and I'm going to shade in for those 5ths. Okay. So from here, what do we do? Well, we have our total of 4/5, and we want to see how many groups of 4 we can create. Now, there are 4 units, 1, 2, 3, 4 in each of these rows. So this is 1 group of 4, 2 groups of 4, 3 groups of 4 and 4 groups of 4. Okay. And there's 4 groups of 4 out of the entire area, which is 20. So my answer should be 4/20. 4 groups, and then I had the area of 20, okay, which was my denominator. Numerically, what does this look like? So let me show you what we did numerically. We took the original fraction, it stayed the same. Same, change, flip. Again, this is just a strategy. This is to help you. This isn't necessary to explain anything. This is a strategy to help you solve numerically. What ended up happening is that because we divided it into 4 groups, we ended up multiplying, which is the inverse of division, by 1/4. Flip, which is the reciprocal. Fraction stayed the same. We changed our operation to multiplication, and we flipped the second fraction because it's the reciprocal, which gives us 4/20. And if you're simplifying this or looking about how much one of these groups is worth, you can simplify this to 1/5. 4 divided by 4 and 20 divided by 4. Okay, now we're going to divide a fraction by a fraction. Again, I'm going to show you a visual model and then follow it up with the numerical equation. So I'm going to think about 1/2. That's my first fraction, 1/2. So I'm going to draw a model and I'm going to divide it into a half. So this is worth 1/2. Now, I'm going to kind of create my own ruler. So I'll label this right below it, or this will be my ruler. And I want to see how I can possibly compare the 1/2 to 1/4. So I'm going to use the same dimensions as my 1/2. And I can tell that this is where the 1/2 mark is. But I'm using 1/4. So when I divide this into fourths, I'm using all of this because that's what's equivalent. So how much is each section worth? Well, let's take a look. I've got 1/4. This is 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. So right now, I have 2 1/4 sections that equal 1/2. So my answer should be 2. Let's take a look at what this numerically looks like. So I'm going to go back. And remember that I started off with 1/2. My total stays the same. So same. I'm going to change division to multiplication because that's the inverse operation or the opposite. And because I changed the symbol to multiplication, I also need to find the reciprocal, which is flip, 4/1. And from here I can multiply straight across. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Let's try that again, just in case you missed it. I'm going to start off this time with 3/4 and divide it by 1/2. So remember, the first thing I'm going to start off with is I'm going to actually start off with drawing a fourths rectangle. So here's my rectangle. I'm going to divide it into fourths. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to shade in 3/4. 1, 2, 3. Right below it, I'm going to create a ruler that is the same length. This is my ruler. And I'm going to be trying to compare it to halves. Well, I know that 2/4 is equal to a half. Okay. So that is 1/2 that we used. 1/2. And then I still need to go to this section. So when you think about it, what's half of a half? If these 2/4, 1/4, 2/4 is equal to a half, essentially what you're looking at is 1/2 plus 1/4. So 1/4 is actually half of 1/2. So my answer is going to be 1/2 is used, and then a half of a half is used. So I should have 1 and 1/2. If you've got to rewind that and pause it and play it again, that can be kind of tricky because of the wording. So we used one group of a half to equal this section. And then we needed to figure out what was a half of a half. So we had 1.5 groups that were used to equal 3/4. Let's talk about this numerically. So we ended up keeping the total the same, changing division to multiplication, and flipping the second fraction, which gave you 6/4, which is equal to 1 2/4. 1 2/4 is equal to 1 1/2.